In 1913, American poet Joyce Kilmer wrote that only God can make a tree. Genetic botanists might soon have questions about that. But what if you wanted to make something bigger, like a whole river? We've been building canals for thousands of years, of course. In fact, part of the definition of a canal is it's a man-made water channel. So, can you build a man-made river without it just being a fancy canal? You can, but it takes a massive engineering effort. We know that for one simple reason. We've already done it. Conceived in the 1960s in one of the driest countries on Earth, we built the Great Man-Made River Project. Libya is a country with no natural rivers. It has always depended for its inhabited existence on a number of life-giving groundwater aquifers. But in 1953, enormous deposits of potable fossil water were found, deep under the ground in southern Libya. Naturally, no one was looking for vast water deposits when they found them. In fact, they were looking for oil. In 1953, Libya was experiencing its oil boom. People were keen to find new resources. In a sense, the lack of intention defined what happened next, which was not very much. The Great Man-Made River Project wasn't launched for another 16 years. Why 1969? That was the start of the Gaddafi regime in Libya. And as with most colossal civil infrastructure projects, the Great Man-Made River Project needed a supporter with the power to move the resources of a national government to really get it going. In 1969, Gaddafi saw the potential of the project and swung the resources of his government behind it. It's important to take a moment and realize the scale of the proposition. Most of the water discovered in the 1950s collected between 38,000 and 14,000 years ago. In terms of a natural resource, that's the drinkable equivalent of an oil field. But you have to both get at it and get it to where it's needed. Otherwise, it's just the ultimate soggy bottom. There are 4 major underground basins where the water is found. The Kufra Basin alone, near the Egyptian border, covers an area of 350,000 square kilometers. That equates to an aquifer 200,000 kilometers wide and 2,000 meters deep. The 600-meter deep aquifer in the Sirte Basin holds more than 10,000 square kilometers of water. The 450,000 square kilometer Murzak Basin, around 4,800 square kilometers. And there's still more water in the Hamada and Kufra basins, extending from the Marghaf Arch and Jabal Sauda to the coast. If you can connect all these with a man-made river, it's an absolute game-changer for a nation with no natural rivers. But here's the thing. All of this began in 1969 with the arrival of the Gaddafi government. None of it was formally inaugurated until 1991, over 2 decades later. What happened in those intervening decades? First, the initial plans for the Man-Made River Project were more poetical than practical. Given the locations of the water basins, Gaddafi had the grand plan to make the deserts flower. Those plans were developed and then ultimately scrapped in favor of a different goal: bringing water to the people who needed it. That meant a significant redrawing of the scope and scale of the project. The project was to be completed in phases. In Phase 1, it would provide 2 million cubic meters of water, from As-Safir and Tazerbo to the Ajdabiya Reservoir to Benghazi and Sirte. That would take 1,200 kilometers of pipeline. Phase 2 would pump water from the southern western aquifer Fezzan to Tripoli and the Jafara Plain. Phase 3 would expand on the Phase 1 system, adding 1.68 million cubic meters a day, for a total daily cubic capacity of 3.68 million cubic meters. It would also add 8 new pumping stations and 700 kilometers of new pipeline. Phase 3 would also supply 138,000 cubic meters a day to Tobruk and the coast, and add a new well field at Al Jaboub through 500 kilometers of new pipeline. In case you were missing the point, this is a massive, trans-generational project to engineer a major solution to public need. Even under normal circumstances, it would take huge engineering effort combined with enormous government investment over many years. With over 1,750 miles or 2,820 kilometers of pipes and aqueducts, it's been called everything from the largest underground network of pipes in the world to the eighth wonder of the world. Right now, it provides 70% of all the fresh water used in Libya. It would be fair to say, though, that Libya has not undergone an excess of normal circumstances on the way from 1969 to right now. Even if we assume, and there is room to do, that between 1969 and 1983 the Gaddafi government had other things on its mind, such as consolidating his government, established by coup d'etat, and mining and exploration of the country's oil reserves. It's still been 40 years since Colonel Gaddafi laid the foundation stone of the Great Man-Made River project. Of that initial 10-year gap between conception and beginning, there's not much to make. Yes, there were initially other plans, but the initial feasibility studies of the project as it stands were conducted in 1974. Actual work on the project started 10 years later. After what could be thought of as a long process of engineering development hell. Once it got up and running, though, initial results were fairly fast to appear. Just 2 years after Phase 1 inauguration in 1986, the Brega plant, which produced the concrete pipes for the project, was inaugurated. The Great Man-Made River project delivered its first water in 1989 to the Ajdabiya Reservoir, and markers of progress on the development of the massive project then came with almost clockwork predictability. There was also water at the Grand Omar Mukhtar Reservoir in 1989. In 1991, the Gardabiya Reservoir got water from the project. In 1996, Tripoli felt the benefits, and in 2007, Garian joined the network. All of this belied the colossal scale of the digging and pipework inherent in the project. Even just Phase 1 involved the excavation of 85 million square meters of earth. It also belies quite how isolated a project the Great Man-Made River was. Gaddafi, having established himself as Libya's ruler by military means, was shunned by the international community throughout his time in office, meaning there was neither a great deal of international investment nor a great deal of international expertise available for the project. That slowed the building of the project down over the decades, although that isolationism was in line with Gaddafi's own nationalist ideals. He wanted the project to be very much an example of making Libya great again. Then, in 2011, the project was dealt 2 serious blows. In the first phase, the first Libyan civil war broke out between Gaddafi loyalists and Western-backed rebels. Gaddafi was assassinated. The prime mover behind the Great Man-Made River and his ability to swing finance behind the project was gone. That was added to by the actions of NATO, which during the war launched an airstrike against the Brega pipeline plant on the grounds, or at least the pretext, that it was a front for military rocket launch placements. Evidence of this proved to be insufficient to continue NATO action. Even with Gaddafi gone, sporadic fighting continued into 2012, only to erupt again into outright war in 2014. The second Libyan civil war would last longer and generate more stagnation in the development of the Great Man-Made River project. It went on from 2014 to 2020, during which time significant development was almost impossible and decay became inevitable. By 2019, 101 of the 479 wells on the Western Pipeline had been dismantled. And in April 2020, a water station controlling the flow to Tripoli was seized by armed militia, who then had the power of life and death over everyone who relied on the station for water in a dry land. What now for the Great Man-Made River project? The Great 4-stage project is practically stalled. Phases 1 and 2 are complete and are providing water to millions. But Phase 3 is stuck in a post-war quagmire. Since the revolution, cases of kidnap have been reported when companies, particularly post-Gaddafi international companies, have tried to return to work on the project. As such, the Great Man-Made River project exists in limbo. On the one hand, it does now actively provide water for 70% of all Libyan, and it is the largest underground network of pipes and aqueducts in the world. It would be churlish in the extreme to describe that as a failure, but given the post-Gaddafi turmoil and instability, it's also not in any sense completed. Phase 3 remains in limbo. A putative Phase 4, which would have seen the completion of the original plans, has not even been started yet. So, the Great Man-Made River Project is both a beneficial multi-generational feat of incredible engineering vision and an as-yet incomplete rendering of that vision. Its future depends on the stability of the Libyan nation and the rededication of energy and capital to its goals.
Remember to hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to stay updated with our latest content. And while you're here, why not check out another one of our exciting videos? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.